Okay, so there we go. So I mentioned right at the beginning that you guys didn't hear. Kent is on vacation, so this is the first time that I'm doing this by myself. So it should be a lot of fun, and it should be a very chill, entertaining stream. We had some pretty good conversation in the comments already. I think if I had to sum it up, we've talked about, I think Omar's going to drive me to a wrestler's house, and we're going to listen to heavy metal music and watch flipped normals, if I got that all right. So it should be fun. We're going to be critiquing some artwork. And yeah, if anything else, let's just dive right in. Oh yeah, somebody said it was their first stream. I think it was Jake. Let me look down here. Yeah, Jacob said it was his first stream. So welcome, Jacob. Hopefully you get a lot out of this one. And no, I have not caught up on Pokemon yet. There's so many games that it's like almost intimidating to start. It's like people that want me to read the Game of Thrones books. I feel like it's just not, like it's so much time that maybe, I don't know. We will see. But I think it'd be fun to play at least a couple of them. Because, yeah, I played the Pokemon Stadium back on the N64. But I didn't actually play like the Game Boy versions. So it's probably something I should do while on an airplane or something. But yeah, so first off, let's look at the first artwork. Okay, so this is a model of a Nintendo Switch by Aaron Rudderham, and he's got a little animation, so we may as well watch that as well. So it's just a spin around, and you can see the front and the back, and he's gone through all of the detail of texturing the back and the sides and all of that. So this is pretty awesome. And here's a actual like render of it. And first, to give some context for this, because I think that's always good before we dive into stuff, he said that he's been doing this kind of stuff consistently since early February, so hopefully I'm improving at an adequate pace, and thanks in advance for any feedback. So first of all, Aaron, if you've been doing this consistently since early February, you are doing really well. Like, you're pretty far ahead of the game if this is like the result of like a couple months of learning. So any feedback that I give is just going to be like, I don't know, really trying to push you to the next level, but at the same time, don't worry that you're not doing a good job or falling behind or whatever. You're doing fantastic. So this is pretty sweet, and I don't actually have a Switch. I know Kent has a Switch, so he's probably bummed that he's missing this one because he could actually like hold it up and look at it and compare. So I'll compare it to like a photo of a Switch, but I hear they're pretty fun. I've played Mario Kart on one, on somebody else's. Also, Doom was pretty cool, though not quite as cool as the PC version because it's kind of scaled down. But I guess my notes on this artistically, first off is the edges are too sharp. And I know we talk about this a lot in terms of like we always want to bevel our edges and whatnot. And you do have a bit of a bevel here. Oh, let me go back and turn on my pointer. Let's see. There we go. You have a bit of a bevel there, or it's just subdivided and you have those edge loops right up against each other, but in this case they're a bit too sharp because if we look at a picture of them, it's built very, very smooth around the sides, and that's because it wants to be very comfortable to hold in your hand and like sit very comfortably and feel soft and playful. And so we want it to look very comfortable and soft to hold. So first, just smooth those out a little bit, and also I guess, let's see, let's continue on the modeling things for now. The buttons are well done, like you've actually textured them and put all the stuff in, but a couple things that could help. Number one is that they could have slightly sloped sides, because right now it looks like they're completely 90 degrees. But if we look at the picture, the tops are actually smaller than the bottom, and so it kind of like slopes out just ever so slightly as it recedes into the device, and that just makes it a little bit, I don't know, more friendly or like more playable. I don't know how to describe that, but it makes it look very pushable, and so that might help there. And also what helps buttons to look like they're really part of the device, because right now it looks like they're just kind of stuck into the other mesh, which is fine. That's a totally legitimate way to do it. But what really helps is to bevel around the outside of that mesh. And what that does is creates a little bit of like shadow and a little bit of highlight going around the button, and I can show this in a better example later on when we look at a PlayStation 4 controller, but that's going to help really sell those buttons as buttons and make them look like they're meant to be pushed. Omar says, my only criticism is that he should have been playing Zelda instead of Bayonetta. Alright, I guess that's fair. That's a good fine critique. What else here? I guess moving on to the materials. So they're very diffuse, especially the controllers on the sides. If we compare this to the picture, this is actually kind of shiny. It's got a pretty good glossy finish. And so just switching up the materials a little bit, I think will help. But also adding a bit of texture as well, because I guess these don't have too much texture, but the buttons and the little thumbsticks definitely do. They have got like a little speckling or a darker plastic. Almost seems like rubber, but it's definitely like a speckled plastic. And adding the texture for that I think would really help. And in addition, if you wanted to go the extra mile and add like fingerprints to this, I think that would really push it just over the top. Now, the very last thing that I want to mention is the lighting is pretty flat. I wouldn't worry about it too much at the moment. If you fix the other things, I think it'll help. But if you take like an inside HDR and put that as the environment, I know you're kind of going for a studio thing, so maybe you'd use area lights instead. But just give it something to reflect, so when you bump up that glossiness, then you can actually see that kind of go over the edges of this. And when we talk about the PlayStation 4 controller, we can talk a little bit more about lighting as well, and you take the same principles that we'll talk about there and apply it to this. But overall, I mean, you've done a really awesome job. It definitely looks like a Switch, looks like it'd be fun to play, and I think it's pretty awesome. So I'm check over the comments, see if anything else here. He finds the material on the model better than in the photo. That could very well be. Man, that might be. I don't have one, so I can't really compare. But it seemed to me like it was pretty glossy. But yeah, along with the lighting, it seems pretty harsh. Like all of these are very small lights. And it looks like you've used cycles just because I can see like a little bit of fireflies and all that, so that's good. But maybe you want to scale those lights up a bit so that the shadows aren't quite so harsh, and maybe you'd go for more gradients and highlights along some of these edges. Yeah, overall you're doing a fantastic job, and keep up the good work. Next up, who do we got? We're going on to, oh, here's just like a recap of what we already talked about. Omar, Your Kitchen. So this one was kind of fun to critique because you gave a couple different variations of the same scene, which kind of helps give a lot more context. So we've got a nighttime scene, we've got a daytime scene, and then you went back and improved it based on a look that you were going for a even different daytime scene. And what I want to compare this to is a blog post that you mentioned that you were getting inspiration from. The guy who wrote the blog post said he was inspired by this particular photographer. So let's also look at a photograph from that photographer. So instead of trying to compare this to other renders, let's just compare it directly to the photo and see if we can get that same feel. Because I think this is the feel that you were going for. You mentioned you wanted that like high key, very soft lighting, and found it a little bit tricky. And it definitely can be tricky. But let's compare it to this photo and see if we can get it to be even better. So I guess the first notes that I had, one of the things that struck me on each three of those is that the scenery outside the window doesn't quite match the lighting in each of the renders. So if we go through these here, yeah, so the outside is pretty warm and it's very sunset-ish, and it doesn't quite match the like harshness of lighting that's coming in. But in addition to that, like this is somewhat of a minor complaint because it's very hard to tell, but if you look at the clouds in both of these, I think the lighting is coming from the right. and then the light in the scene is coming from the left. I could be wrong because it's a little bit hard to tell when it's a bunch of soft clouds, but that's what it appears to look like because some of the clouds get darker as the light like diffuses through it on this side. And so yeah, it just seems a little bit odd that we have a really harsh white light coming in over here, but we're not seeing any of that reflected in the clouds. So let's see. And then over here you have like the sunbeams, which is pretty awesome, but it also makes it look like really dusty outside, or I don't know, none of these quite match. They're pretty close. And just finding random photographs and having that actually match is ridiculously difficult, so no hard feelings there. But I think it would be better if you just stuck with an HDR and used that for the lighting. I know it's might seem like it's kind of cheating or whatever, but if you just have that be whatever's outside and then also have that be the main source of the sunlight, then I think it'll just naturally match and it'll be a lot easier to make it all tie together a bit better. Let's see what the comments are. Okay. But yeah, I think starting out with an HDR would help. It's hard to get some of these sharper shadows from an HDR, but if you use a like higher resolution one and bump up the, I think, multiple important samples for the world, as well as, what was the other thing? I don't remember, but off the top of my head, I guess we can look at it later. But yeah, if you grab one off HDR Haven from Greg, then they have quite a lot of stops built into the image, and so you're going to get this range. If you just use a low quality HDR and it only has, you know, a few stops, then you're always going to get like this really flat, soft lighting. But if you use a higher quality one, then you can get these sharp shadows, and it should work pretty easily. So I think that'll help a little bit. But also, if you're basing it off of a lot of these high key renders and photographs, then the lighting is a little bit too splotchy. One thing that they all have in common is that the lighting is super, super soft throughout all the walls and all the furniture and whatnot. Whereas here we definitely have some of the light playing off the cabinets and furniture over here. So that's totally fine. Like, that can be a stylistic choice and you can find that in your render. But it's impossible to match that exactly with the soft lighting that you're referencing. So it's just sort of a balance there. Let's see. Hello, more people are joining. That's awesome. Yes, so it's a little bit splotchy. One thing that you can try to do is, I think you said that you're already using Filmic, and that's perfect. That's exactly what we want to do for interior renders. Try using the false color to judge how bright this is. If you switch the color management to false color, then it'll give you like a green to red of how, I guess, how bright things are that are being reflected. And so if you'll know that if something is orange, then it's maybe a little bit too much, or maybe just right. If it's red, then it's too much for sure. But if it's green or blue, then you want to bump it up even more. So use that to judge the brightness of your lights, and that actually really affects the render in a surprising way. Because I know that Kent doesn't really use it, but I think one thing that's kind of missing when he does some of the lighting for like interiors and stuff is that bumping up the lights is also going to impact how it bounces, because it's going to increase the brightness of the bounce, and so you're going to get that softer look by bringing up the lights. So definitely use false color, and that'll improve the bounce lighting as well and give you more of that soft feel. But also another trick that you can use is, instead of just using the HDR or just using a sun lamp, you can also take an area light, scale it up really big, and place it right outside the window. And that's going to give you a really nice diffuse gradient throughout the entire room. And maybe you can color it like the atmosphere a little bit, and that will give you that nice soft color, and things will, I think that'll be a little bit closer to the image that you're going for. So some other notes. let's see. So the chandelier is a really cool design, and I think it's pretty sweet, but it looks messy in context. So actually this chandelier is super similar, but you can see that it's kind of isolated and we can see it all by itself. Whereas here it kind of gets tangled up in the window in the back and the curtains, and it looks a bit messy. So I'm not sure exactly how to fix it without maybe trying a different type of chandelier, or moving it to an area where it's not quite overlapping with these black windows, or maybe make the window pane not black. Either one, this one is kind of just getting tangled up in the background there. Excuse me. Especially right at the bottom here, and that's where it looks a little bit messy. William said, how about a portal? And yeah, if you're finding a lot of noise, you can try portals as well. Hopefully that'll help reduce the noise. I'm not sure if portals work well with HDRs. I'd have to double check. And then a few other minor notes. The curtains look a little bit like wax, where I zoomed in really close and they didn't have any texture on them, and it looked kind of like wax paper, or like a really thin wax that's just kind of stretched. And I think, yeah, a little bit of texture here would go a long way. But also what helps them, or what makes them look even more like wax, is that they're kind of floating in back towards the middle here. Whereas I don't think they would really do that naturally. All cloth falls straight down, so it might get pushed out because of the wrinkles a little bit, but it's not going to come out quite that far. And so that's what makes it look kind of waxy, because if you pull that back, then wax would like attempt to stay in place. But to make it look like cloth, if you just drop that straight down and maybe add like a little bit of flare around the edges, that would look a lot more natural, and I think would help make it look more like cloth. I think it looks like you used the cloth sim to start this out, and so maybe that was just something that it did and it didn't have time to settle all the way. Then it might do something like that. But yeah, just bring those in and make it more of a straight line down, and it should look a bit better. And yeah, add a texture, maybe make it a little bit thicker. That should be better. And lastly, so the floor is super dark. It's a little bit lighter in this shot than in this one, and I can see that you're going for that like really main contrasty look, and so it makes sense to, I don't know, bring that down a bit and contrast that with the rest of the room. But it kind of dominates everything else when it's so dark, so I would suggest bringing it back up a little bit, and then maybe making the cracks that dark or something like that, just to make sure that it's not dominating the entire room. Another thing that you could try to do is crop it a little bit. I don't know if I still have this here. Yeah, so you could also try cropping it where you just take off some of the sides and bring that up, so that way it's not dominating it as much, and it also helps make it look a little bit more like a photo because things are running off the edges. And you have the right idea with putting the fridge over here on the side and making it seem like there's a world outside of this picture, but I think cropping it like this or something similar, just tightening it up, will help balance the composition a little bit so it's not all shoved to the left, but it also just kind of make the eye believe that there's more going on than what you actually see. And you'll notice that even in the photographs, if we go back to this guy's photo, he's also doing this similar things where he's cropping off the top here, parts of the window, the bottom of the table here. Not everything's in frame. And so I think that'll help sell it a little bit more as a photo. And then the very last thing that I added was just a little bit of camera distortion, or like lens distortion, barrel distortion. And so it's a very subtle effect, just kind of rounds out the middle, but it helps sell it as a photo more than a CG image, because without it, all the lines are super straight and you can kind of tell. And you know, a lot of photographers will oftentimes compensate for that, but not always perfectly, so just giving it just a touch of distortion will definitely help. Yeah, other than that, I mean, this is a really good image. I think you are well on your way to making a like completely photorealistic scene. I think that if you just take this like a little bit farther, I think you really nailed it. Modeling is excellent. Everything looks great. Just a few of those tweaks, and I think you'll be good to go. Let's see, any other comments? Let's go through those a bit. Okay, I think we covered most of this. William likes the dark floor. All right, sweet. Excellent, keep up the good work. Next up is Fire Nation Sword by Dexstar77. And I don't think he's in the chat, at least I haven't seen him quite yet. So hopefully he can watch this later. But we can all learn from it as well. So this is a pretty sweet sword, and I just have a couple quick notes on it. The first is that the tip looks a little bit like a pencil. Like it actually has like the ridges and everything, and so I have a hard time taking it seriously when it looks like, I don't know, it makes it look a little bit more like a toy. And yeah, it looks like a writing instrument or like a letter opener. So one thing that you could do is just take this middle edge loop and flatten it out, and so maybe bring these vertices up a little bit so that just makes one triangle point right in here. And then the top of the blade is fairly flat. Maybe has like a little bit of a ridge, but yeah, just flattening that out, making it less pencil-like would really help. Oh man, excuse me. All right, the next thing is that the handle guard, I can't really tell what it's made out of. And so I tried picking a reference material and then try to base the materials and textures off of that, because I'm not really sure what that is. That the blade definitely reads very clearly as steel, and so does the handle, but this material, I don't know what it is, so I don't know if it's strong or if it's brittle. It actually looks a little bit brittle. So yeah, I'd pick a metal and just try to apply that same thing to this, and you can, you know, tint it one way or another if you want to get those colors back in, but I definitely try to base it off of a real material and use that to kind of sell the effect. Let's see, also, yeah, the gem here is also a little bit hard to tell. I know gems are very difficult because you'd want to use a refractive material, but if there's nothing really behind it to refract, then it gets a little bit tricky, because you need a lot of like reflection bounce lightings in order for it to really show up as a gem. So that's definitely a very tricky thing to do, but you could try. I know Kent has a gemstone shader forge lesson, so maybe try watching through that and applying some of those things to the gem here in the middle. Let's see, next up, the handguard looks like it's inspired by the symbol. So I actually didn't really watch a lot of Avatar, but I looked up the Fire Nation symbol, and while it's kind of like reminiscent of that, it doesn't quite look like it. So I would try just taking the symbol and making a 2D version of it in Blender, and then playing with it in those 3 dimensions, but make the 2D one first, and then go from there. And I think that will make it a little bit more recognizable, because I wouldn't have been able to pick this out as a Fire Nation sword specifically. And let's see. Oh yeah, so again, I'm not familiar with Avatar, so I could very well be wrong here. Correct me if I'm wrong. But purple doesn't seem like a fire type color, so maybe go with more of a orangish or reddish thing. If you use like a really like orangish gold, has like a little bit of red tint to it, I can see that being very fire-ish. Yeah, the materials don't quite sell the effect here, but overall it's looking good. The handle guard, I'm mostly just picking on the handle guard because the rest of it it's pretty awesome. It's a bit too simple and blocky. Maybe switch it over to smooth shading and kind of have this be an even flow all the way down here. And maybe try using a bump map and engrave some patterns into here, or give it a little bit more detail, because at the moment it's a little bit too simple and block-ish. And the very last note that I didn't actually have on my notes, this is a recap, but the steel is actually running the wrong direction in the blade, or at least the pattern. So it's going sideways while the blade is going up and down, and what would happen if you actually made a sword like that is it would be a lot weaker because you'd be hitting it, it wouldn't be running with the grain, so it'd be easier to crack. You can tell I'm not a swordsmith, so I couldn't tell you all the right words there, but you'd want the grain of the metal running in the direction so that you're hitting it against the grain, so it's a bit stronger. So flip over the texture 90 degrees and you should be good to go. Let's see, any other things in the chat? Oh, one sec. Okay, I was getting a phone call. Let's see, William says the scratches on the blade don't have any depth. And I'm not sure what this weird like artifact is on the PowerPoint. That's super weird. But yeah, the scratches don't have any depth, and that is true, though I don't know if you want them to have a lot of depth. Well, I guess I don't think they're supposed to be scratches. I think it's just the grain of the metal. If it is supposed to be scratches, then yeah, you might want to chip those in a little bit with the bump map or normal map. But yeah, for the grain, I don't think it needs any bump because it should be very polished and shiny. Okay, last one is PlayStation Controller by Bach Post, and he says in the comments, I'd like to say in advance that in my PlayStation Controller, you can see the overlays of the lights, and the file didn't save properly, so I can't change it. Oh, that's fine. That is totally okay. We can actually look at this in Blender and kind of evaluate it there. Omar, now the call is from Missouri, so I don't even know I don't know anybody in Missouri. All these robocalls, man, killing me. Okay, so PlayStation Controller is pretty awesome, and you rendered it in Eevee, which is cool. And you wanted specifically critiques on the topology and whatnot. So to give a bit of context on this, you said that the topology on the left pad doesn't look that great, and to be honest, I'm gonna disagree with you right there. The topology actually looks pretty good, and we can see it in Sketchfab here. If I zoom in, the topology on these left pads is totally fine. Like, it's kind of a weird pattern, but that's not a bad thing. It's a mostly flat surface, and you have all of your supporting edge loops. Things all connect together well. It's all quads, there's no pinching. So this, honestly, it's good to go. I would not worry about it at all. So yeah, don't worry about that. Your other notes were the transition from the grips to the body. Yep, we'll definitely talk about that. And the lighting, we can talk about that as well. And how to create a bunch of small holes behind the touchpad are kind of the questions. So to go over the critiques, so the grip topology needs definition. It's a little bit twisted and odd. So let's look at this in Blender. And I've modified the left grip a bit more than the right one. So the right one is what the original is, and then the left is kind of my modification here. And let's just look at the wireframe first. So when you subdivide it, I know yours was not subdivided. I kind of did that on my own, but I figured if you want to make a high quality render, then you sort of modeled this specifically for subdivision, the way you placed your loops and whatnot, so I'm going to guess that it's supposed to be subdivided. And Aaron says, props for tackling a complex shape. Like, seriously, this is really complex, especially when you want to put holes in here and all that stuff. You're tackling something that's not easy whatsoever, so certainly props for that. But all the same, we can still improve it and pick it apart. But yeah, so it's a little bit lumpy, and you can see that right in here. Is it not showing my grease pencil? There we go. It's a little bit lumpy right in there, and over here, and over there. So those are like the larger problem areas, and we can see in the topology what the problems are. So one of the lumps is due to the pole right there. The problem over here is due to this kind of being not quite pinched, but a little bit odd. You do have a triangle right here, which I think is not helping. And then lastly, I think the most important part to get right is, like you said, the transition between the handle and the body of the controller, which is pretty difficult. But I think what we can do, let me switch to drawing on the surface. There we go. Is just changing the direction of your loops, because the problem is that it looks twisted. Let's turn off subsurf, and we can see any like broken quads a lot more easily if we turn on ambient occlusion, so I'll do that. You can see that this quad right here is really broken, and that's sort of causing a problem because it's trying to run in a couple different directions at once. And so what you want is a loop that goes pretty much all the way around here, and then a loop that runs all the way through there. So you're close, but not quite. And so we want to fix that really broken quad area and kind of smooth this out, because you can see as we rotate around this, there's lots of things going on over there. So as an alternative, I took that and made a few adjustments. And so instead of having the loop kind of run down here and then back, and then have this one run down, we've got one going down this way and going straight down, and then this one also just goes straight down and then continues on to the back, and this one just goes straight through like so. So that way we avoid that pole that's right there, and instead we have a couple different poles. We have a pole right here and a pole right there, but they're at slightly better places, just because that's a little bit more towards where the two types of surfaces are connecting. And so I think that topology definitely helps, and you can see it if you look at it with a matte cap. Let's see, switch over to a more reflective matte cap, turn on subsurf, and yeah, you can see that, well, maybe not that one. Let's try, yeah, you can see how kind of like lumpy and mushy that is, but then when we go and clearly define those edge loops, then things are nice and smooth and straight. So I think that's a good way, and I can share the file if you want to download it and like compare the two yourself. That's not a problem. I can do that after the stream if you want. But another thing is just the front of the controllers here, and you've got that triangle, and it's a little bit awkward. So what I did is I actually deleted everything from here onward, because you have this pole as well. That was kind of weird. So I took these vertices like so all the way down to the other pole and just deleted them, and then deleted the rest of these as well. And then I took this edge loop, flattened it out, loop tools and flatten, and then from there I took that, extruded it, kind of scaled it down like so, and then did like a grid fill. I guess that won't work for the grid fill. I must have changed one of the edge loops in order to get that to work. But I did a grid fill, and then just kind of smoothed that out a bunch of times, and it worked a bit better. And also used proportional editing to kind of undo some of that twisting rotation. Smooth this out a bit. But yeah, I think that will help a good amount so that it's not quite so lumpy. But another note, so this pad is totally fine. You said that you could use less around the pad, like that's true. I mean, but that's an easy fix. You can just delete some of those edge loops. Probably just that one, or maybe that one. I wouldn't worry about it too much. So yeah, you could do that, but not a huge deal either way because they're very easy to modify. One note about the pads in particular is, so I flattened this one out, though I think this one was completely flat as well. But if you look at a picture of a controller, they're actually a little bit concave. So that's something that could help you add just that extra touch of detail, is making it so that they actually slope in. And the only reason I noticed that is because on these buttons here, the thickness of the button seems to be slightly less on the outside over here than in the middle. Same over here, and over here. So it looks like it's actually sloping in ever so slightly towards the middle and giving it a nice texture, or nice, I don't know, it just seems like it feels comfortable in the thumb like that. So helping it be not quite so flat will help with the reflections as you go and render this and make it look a little bit more realistic. But yeah, so beyond that, oh, and I don't think I covered how I fixed this area, and I don't remember all of the exact steps, but essentially I just took everything around this pole here that I didn't quite like, actually let's leave those, and just hit F to fill, make that one large ugly n-gon, and then go back and start connecting these things later. So if you have an area that you're not quite sure what to do with, make it all an n-gon. It's gonna look super messy, but it'll give you like the breathing room, and it'll let you come up with something completely new rather than having to like rely on what's already there. So that should help a bit. But beyond that, let's see. So, oh yeah, buttons should have bevels around them, or little indents. So I've done that over here on a couple of these buttons. Excuse me. So you can see the top one and the left one, gosh, don't have any indents. So it just kind of looks like it's going straight into the controller, and that might actually be fairly realistic. However, it really helps sell the effect if you just take the edge, and I like how you actually modeled a cutout, so that makes this super easy. Just extrude that a little bit, scale it down, bring it down along the z-axis like that, and so we're going to get a little bit of that indent. And what that's going to do is just provide that little extra bit of shadow when we're looking at the lighting, and also just a slight glint of a highlight. And that'll help those two surfaces interact a bit better. So do that around pretty much all your buttons, the one in the center, all these over here, and you can see that when I do that, it actually helps them read as buttons from a little bit farther away. So here, I guess you can't really tell too much, but if we look at this at the right angle, you know, the button over here reads more clearly than the button over there, just because we have that glint of highlight surrounding it. What else? The thumbsticks can have slightly thicker edges, so I think the original one, if we look at the picture, let's see, let's go back. Yeah, they're very thin. The little surrounding area, this part is quite thin, and it looks like in the photo it's actually fairly thick and kind of tapers in towards the top, so that's a fairly minor tweak, but will also help sell the effect, because all of these different things are really telling the scale of the image. So we can scale that in a bit. And yeah, just play with this to try to get that same sort of effect. But that, again, is just another one of those things that tries to make it a little bit more comfortable to hold in your thumbs. This looks like you kind of get scratched a bit. Omar says, can you post a link on the forum? Yeah, sure. So once I'm done, I'll upload this to Pastall and then post it in the forum, and you can pick it apart. Last couple things. So let's see. Yeah, this is looking excellent. I mean, you tackled a really complex object. So if you want to take this even further, once you fix the things that we've already mentioned, then yeah, if you want to carve out some of the buttons on the trigger there, you can see there's the L1, L2, R1, R2, and also the charging port. If you want to actually make that into the geometry, I think that'll go a long way in just like making this go from like this is a decent solid model to like a really highly polished, totally professional looking model. I think that'll just push it over the edge there. And lastly, this construction line here, or Kent calls them construction lines. I guess I don't really have a term for them, so I guess that's what I'll use. But the split edge where these two pieces kind of come together during the manufacturing process, I think would really help sell the effect. And that's also going to force your topology to follow along in the right direction, because at the moment it's not quite following. Well, it's actually fairly close. Yeah, all you need to do is just bring the edge loop up and around, which you might have actually done earlier before I kind of destroyed it. It was just a little bit farther down. But yeah, if you actually make that split line into the geometry, if you take one of these edge loops, let's say that one, yeah, you can just hit V and not B, V, and just rip that down like so, and then extrude this inwards, fill that in, and it should be good. So that's going to really help sell this as a like genuine controller, and will look very similar to a photograph. So beyond that, I mean, super good job. It's looking really good. The last thing is just the materials. Definitely apply some textures and go for that really like rubbery feel. Especially, all these have like subtly different textures. The bottom section here is slightly different than the top section here. The triggers have a little bit more of like a rough bump to them, whereas the buttons are extremely smooth. And even the inside here is like very shiny and reflective, while the outside isn't. So there's lots of different things going on, like all these little dots here. Lots of different texture going on, and if you add that into the model, that's going to really sell it, really push it over the edge. And yeah, go ahead and render it out in cycles as well. So the original one was rendered in Eevee, and that's sweet just to see how cool Eevee can be, but it's not going to give you the same quality of results. It's not going to, for example, reflect anything that's off screen, because their screen space reflection is, if something's not on the screen, it's not going to be reflected. And so if you run it out in cycles, you're not going to have to think about all that different stuff. It'll just be easier to get a very like polished and realistic looking result. So add those textures in, render it out in cycles, and I think it'll look awesome. The lighting setup looks pretty good. I think if you've got some good highlights in the right places. I'd say maybe a little bit stronger of a gradient running from this side to this side over there, just to kind of highlight that. But overall, I think the change in render will really kind of dictate that a bit more. After Blender 2.8 is released, will there be any use for cycles? Yeah, absolutely. Cycles is not going away anytime soon. So Eevee has a lot of cool features, and it'll be good for like very quick, fast projects. But there's just certain things that you absolutely can't even do that you can in cycles. And so yeah, cycles will still be probably my main render engine for anything that I want to be totally realistic, and then Eevee will be more for quick projects and stuff. Let's see, anything else? I think that was just about it for this model. Let's see if anything else in the comments. Nope, I think that's it. So those are the 4 that we're going over today. Hopefully that was good. I mean, even just like looking at Omar's reference blog post that he posted. I actually hadn't seen that post before, and so I learned some stuff just by going through some of these renders, and I always think it's pretty fun. Pitor says, like, better ray tracing and subsurface scattering. Oh, absolutely. Reflection, subsurface scattering, translucency is better. Shadows are instant and immediate. Like, you're not going to have any weird, like, biasing issues or whatever. There's just so many things to think about when it comes to real-time rendering that you kind of have to, like, balance and use the right light probes, and you can still get a fairly good result, but it's never going to match the quality. So yeah, cycles all the way. And oh yeah, can you give us some advice on the holes? Yes, that's right. That was in my notes and I totally forgot. So you wanted to put some holes right below the, I think this is a touchpad. I don't know. I don't have a PlayStation 4. I think it's a touchpad though. But you wanted to put them here, and that is, I mean, it's not going to be an easy task because it's not a flat surface. So that makes it a lot harder, but I still think you can do it. So I guess the way I would go about it, let's erase some of this stuff, is I would first make the holes just using a separate object and just make mesh circles and kind of outline where you want those holes to be, and make that pattern just using a separate object on a flat surface. And I don't know what the pattern is, but just make those holes. And then what you can do is just take that geometry and shrink wrap that to the controller itself, and then connect that in to the sides. So it might get a little bit messy because you have a lot of vertices here going around at the outside, but you could probably reduce that number, because if you're going to subsurf this, you know, a subsurfed square, actually let's just tab in edit mode here. If I take something that's roughly square and I subsurf that enough times and it's small enough, it looks like a circle. So you don't need to actually make all of these super circular. If you just have a bunch of, you know, square holes and you subsurf it, it'll look pretty darn close, and that way you don't have to mess with as much complexity. So yeah, make that pattern, shrink wrap that to the surface, and then the only thing that you have to do here to make sure that it works well with the surface, because it's curved, is make sure that your edge loops are running, you know, in this direction and are fairly even. So you have some lines that kind of go all the way through and connect all of them, because if they're, you know, connecting like this and have a bunch of triangles that way or whatever, then it's just going to look kind of broken. But if for the most part, if things are running that way, then you should be set. William says, I hate booleans. Oh, that was a question about, yeah, booleans. Yeah, I wouldn't go with booleans actually. I've tried that with a few things, and for here I wouldn't really go for it. It can be useful for like a nice initial blockout, but you're not going to get the correct topology going around there. So when you subdivide it, it's going to look really messy and it's not going to connect up right. So yeah, when you subsurf it, it'll totally destroy the shading around that area. So yeah, exactly. Like Bach said, they require a lot of cleanup, and that's certainly true. I've been looking at, there's a Blender Market add-on mesh machine that I've been keeping my eye on. I haven't tried it yet, but it's supposed to make the process a lot easier with adding in the right topology and like adding bevels and like removing bevels and stuff. It looks super cool, but I haven't tried it yet. And then, oh, I almost forgot. So this is another thing that I wanted to mention during this, is that this week there's going to be a Blender Market sale. So if there's anything that you want to check out there, there's not everything is on sale, I think, because each individual person had to opt in, but there's tons of stuff that is. I think it's over like 250 or 300 of some of the best products are on sale. So definitely check that out. It's like 20% off, I believe. Let's check that out. Yeah, okay, so like over 350 products are on sale, and you get some sweet stuff like Flip Fluids, RotopoFlow, Mesh Machine, that's the one I was looking at earlier. I might actually pick that one up. So yeah, if you want to check that out, no obligation, of course. And I also made a cute little render over here that is just a piece of it. But yeah, I used as many assets as I could from the sale and smashed that into one render, and that was kind of a fun challenge just to see how far I could go with just assets from the sale. But yeah, have until Saturday, and check that out if you want. Excellent. So I think that wraps everything up. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'm glad you guys were here. Not everybody who got critiqued was here, but for those who were, I think it was very constructive. Bach said that it was helpful, so awesome. We'll be doing one more of these, I believe, next week. We might do another one if there's enough, but I think we might have something else scheduled, so we'll see. But we'll definitely get through all the ones that are posted in the community. So if you've been watching and you haven't asked for a critique and you'd like one, go ahead to that community thread, post your work, and if you're a citizen subscribing member, then we'll go ahead and critique it on the stream. Awesome. So thanks again, and I'll see you guys next time.